You ever hear about the Carnival of Shadows? Some say it was just an urban legend, a wandering carnival that would appear overnight on the outskirts of forgotten towns, hidden deep in shadowed valleys or fog-covered plains. Bright lights, haunting music, and laughter that carried on the wind. But if you wandered too close, if you bought a ticket, you'd never leave. The story begins with Lucas, a 17-year-old boy with a tattered backpack, a head full of dreams, and nowhere left to go. He'd been walking for hours down a cracked rural highway when he saw it. A faint glow flickering through the trees. Bright reds, deep blues, twinkling golds. The lights of a carnival. The scent of caramel and popcorn drifted faintly on the cool night air, and the distant sound of calliope music echoed softly through the trees. Lucas hesitated at the edge of the forest, his sneakers scraping against loose gravel. "No way," he muttered, "out here, in the middle of nowhere." But hunger gnawed at his stomach, and the promise of warmth, and maybe food, was too tempting to resist. The entrance gate was crooked but grand, with faded red and white paint peeling from the wooden archway. Above it, flickering bulbs spelled out the words, "Carnival of Shadows, one night only." There was no one at the ticket booth. The small window was cracked, and the sign dangling in front of it read, "Admission, one promise." One promise? Lucas squinted at the sign. What does that even mean? But the gate creaked open on its own, as if inviting him inside. He stepped through. The carnival was alive. Strings of glowing bulbs crisscrossed above rows of faded striped tents. Ferris wheels and merry-go-rounds creaked softly as they turned in slow, mechanical circles. The air was thick with the scent of buttered popcorn, cotton candy, and something faintly metallic. Something wrong. But the strangest thing of all? There were no people, no visitors, no carnival workers, no laughter, no chatter, just the faint hum of lights and the distant crackle of speakers playing an out-of-tune waltz. Lucas stuffed his hands into the pockets of his hoodie and walked cautiously down the central path. "Hello?" he called out. "Anyone here?" No answer. But then, from somewhere nearby, a faint voice carried on the wind. Step right up, try your luck." Lucas turned sharply toward the sound. A game booth stood ahead, its lights flickering weakly. A large stuffed bear hung lopsided on one hook, and faded bottles were stacked in uneven pyramids. Behind the counter stood a man in a pinstripe suit, his face hidden beneath the brim of a faded top hat. "Welcome, young sir," the man said with a grin, his voice far too cheerful. "Care to try your luck?" Lucas hesitated. What's the prize?" The man tipped his hat upward, revealing a face that was too smooth, like wax stretched over a skull. His grin was impossibly wide, and his teeth gleamed like porcelain. "The prize, dear boy, is freedom." Lucas took a step back. I think I'll pass." The man's grin faltered slightly, and his waxen face twitched as if it were struggling to hold its shape. "Suit yourself," he said, his voice lower now. Lucas turned and walked away quickly, his sneakers scuffing against the cracked pavement. As he passed rows of empty food stalls and motionless rides, he felt eyes on him. The shadows between tents seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. And somewhere, faint but persistent, he heard laughter. High-pitched, sharp, wrong. Lucas stopped near the merry-go-round. Its painted horses were frozen mid-gallop, their glass eyes staring blankly ahead. The music playing from the speakers sounded warped, like an old record spinning too slowly. Okay. This is officially too weird," Lucas said aloud. He turned to leave, but a hand grabbed his wrist. Lucas flinched and spun around. A girl stood in front of him, no older than 14, with tangled black hair and wide, terrified eyes. She wore a faded blue dress and clutched a small porcelain doll tightly against her chest. "Don't go that way," she hissed, her voice trembling. Lucas froze. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" The girl shook her head rapidly. There's no time. You have to listen to me. They're watching you." "Who's watching me?" She glanced nervously over her shoulder, her grip tightening on the doll. "The carnival folk. They don't like visitors who wander too far without paying their price." Lucas felt a cold knot twist in his stomach. "What price?" The girl's wide eyes locked onto his. "Your promise." Lucas shook his head. "That doesn't make any sense." "A promise for what?" The girl's lips trembled. "To stay." Suddenly, the lights above them flickered violently, and a deep, metallic gong echoed through the carnival grounds. The girl's face went pale. "They know we're talking. We have to move. Now." She grabbed Lucas's hand and pulled him toward one of the side paths between two dark tents. As they ran, Lucas glanced over his shoulder. Shapes were moving in the fog behind them, figures wearing masks and costumes, their faces frozen in twisted grins. They glided silently, their hollow eyes locked onto Lucas. The laughter returned, louder this time, echoing through the empty carnival grounds. The girl pulled him into a dark corner behind a stack of broken carnival crates. "Don't make a sound," she whispered. Lucas pressed his back against the wooden crates, his breath hitching in his throat. The shadows shifted, and one of the carnival folk passed by. A tall figure, in a cracked porcelain mask, with painted red lips, frozen in an eternal grin. It paused, turning its head slowly, as if sniffing the air. Lucas squeezed his eyes shut, his heart hammering in his chest. Finally, the figure moved on, disappearing into the fog. The girl let out a trembling breath. "They won't stop until they find you now," she whispered. Lucas looked at her, fear etched across his face. "How do we get out of here?" The girl's eyes flicked toward the distant Ferris wheel, its silhouette faint against the night sky. "There's a way out," she said softly. "But it's not easy." From somewhere deep within the carnival, the distorted sound of a calliope organ began to play, and the lights, flickering, twisting, seemed to turn toward them. Lucas crouched low behind the stack of broken carnival crates, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. The girl beside him, small, fragile-looking, clutching her porcelain doll tightly, peeked over the edge, her wide eyes darting through the swirling fog. The distorted calliope music played faintly in the distance, its warbled notes sounding like a carnival tune dragged through shattered glass. "They're still looking for us," she whispered, her voice trembling. Lucas swallowed hard. "Who are they? What is this place?" The girl turned toward him, her pale face illuminated faintly by the flickering carnival lights. "This place isn't real. At least, not like the world you know," she said softly. "It's a trap. A place built on promises, secrets, and regret. The carnival folk, they're part of it now. And if they catch you, you'll be part of it too." Lucas's hands shook. Okay. But there's a way out, right? You said something about the Ferris wheel?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. The Ferris wheel isn't just a ride, it's a gate. But getting there." Her voice trailed off as a faint shadow passed over them. From somewhere nearby, a deep, distorted laugh echoed through the fog. Step right up. We've got a show tonight." Lucas shuddered. "We can't stay here. We have to move." The girl nodded, clutching her doll tighter. "Follow me. Stay low. Don't look at them. And whatever you do, don't stop." They crept through the narrow alleyways between carnival tents, their shoes muffled on the damp earth. Lucas could feel the fog clinging to his clothes, cold and wet, as it curled around their ankles like ghostly fingers. The girl led him with surprising confidence, weaving through the maze-like carnival grounds. Every now and then, Lucas would catch glimpses of the carnival folk, twisted figures in faded costumes, porcelain masks cracked and glinting faintly in the flickering lights. They moved strangely, gliding rather than walking, their hollow eyes scanning the shadows. At one point, Lucas nearly stumbled into a fortune-teller's tent. The flaps hung loosely, and a faint glow pulsed from inside. Inside, behind a cracked crystal ball, sat a woman in a black veil, her skeletal hands resting gently on the table. Her hollow eyes glinted faintly as she whispered, "Lucas, come closer. Let me read your fate." Lucas froze, his stomach twisting into knots. The girl yanked his sleeve sharply. "Don't listen to her. Keep moving." They hurried past, the woman's whisper following them like a faint breeze. "Your fate is already sealed, dear boy." After what felt like hours of crawling, ducking, and running through the endless maze of tents and broken rides, they finally emerged into an open clearing. The Ferris wheel loomed above them, its skeletal structure glowing faintly against the foggy night sky. The gondolas hung motionless, like hollow eyes staring downward. Lucas took a step forward, but the girl grabbed his arm. "Wait," she whispered. Lucas stopped, his breath visible in the freezing air. Something's wrong. The fog in the clearing began to shift. Slowly, almost deliberately, shapes began to emerge. Figures. The carnival folk were closing in, their masks catching faint glints of the Ferris wheel's lights. Leading them was a man in a tall black top hat, the same man Lucas had seen at the game booth. His waxen face grinned impossibly wide, and his hollow eyes gleamed faintly beneath the brim of his hat. "Leaving so soon, young man?" the man crooned, his voice like oil slipping through glass. "But the fun is only just beginning." The girl gripped Lucas's arm tighter. "Run." Lucas didn't hesitate. They sprinted toward the Ferris wheel, their footsteps loud against the gravel. The carnival folk followed, their movements sharp and unnatural, gliding across the ground like puppets dragged by invisible strings. The Ferris wheel loomed closer, its entrance gate hung crooked, chains rusting and lights flickering. "Come on," Lucas shouted. They stumbled onto the platform, and Lucas pushed the girl into one of the gondolas. He jumped in after her and slammed the door shut. For a moment, nothing happened. The figures surrounded the Ferris wheel, their hollow eyes watching, their twisted smiles frozen. The man in the top hat stepped forward, his voice rising. "You can't run from us, Lucas. The carnival doesn't let anyone leave without paying their price." The Ferris wheel shuddered. The lights flickered, and slowly, it began to move. The gondola creaked as it ascended into the night sky, the carnival shrinking below them. Lucas's breath came in sharp gasps, his head resting against the cold metal frame. The girl sat across from him, clutching her porcelain doll tightly. "They can't reach us up here, can they?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling. The girl shook her head slowly. "Not yet. But we're not free. Not yet." Lucas glanced out of the gondola window. From this height, the carnival looked different. The tents stretched out like spider webs, their outlines sharp and distorted. The fog pooled in dark, unnatural patterns, and the Ferris wheel seemed suspended above an endless void. "Why is this happening?" Lucas asked softly. The girl looked at him with sad, tired eyes. "Because the carnival doesn't just take people, Lucas. It takes what they owe. Their regrets, their promises, their unfinished stories." Lucas's voice cracked. "But I didn't promise anything." The girl hesitated. "You did the moment you stepped through the gate." Lucas's stomach dropped. Suddenly, the Ferris wheel shuddered violently. The gondola rocked, and Lucas grabbed the metal bar to steady himself. Down below, the man in the top hat was staring directly at them, his arm outstretched. The Ferris wheel stopped moving. The girl's eyes went wide with panic. No, they're trying to pull us back down." Lucas gripped the bar tighter. "What do we do?" The girl stared out at the distant horizon. "There's only one way out, Lucas. You have to jump." Lucas's eyes went wide. "What? Are you insane?" The gondola shuddered again, and the fog began to rise, curling around the Ferris wheel like tendrils of smoke. "If you stay, they'll take you, Lucas. Forever." Lucas looked down. The void below was deep, endless, and utterly black. The girl met his eyes, her voice steady despite the fear in her face. "Trust me, Lucas. Jump." The Ferris wheel creaked. The fog rose higher. Lucas's hands trembled as he climbed onto the edge of the gondola. He looked back one last time, at the girl, at the carnival below, at the endless sea of fog. And then he jumped. The wind screamed in his ears, the world turning into a blur of fog, light, and darkness. And then everything went black. Darkness, cold, silence. Lucas's body felt weightless as he tumbled through an endless void. The rush of air around him screamed in his ears, yet he felt nothing. No ground, no end, just falling. And then his body hit something solid. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs, and for a moment Lucas couldn't move. His chest ached, his head spun, and the coldness of the surface beneath him seeped into his skin. Slowly, he opened his eyes. Above him stretched a starless sky, black and infinite. Around him, faint golden lights flickered like distant lanterns. He pushed himself up on trembling arms, coughing as he tried to catch his breath. The ground beneath him wasn't earth. It was wooden planks, old and weathered, arranged in a sprawling platform suspended above an endless void. Fog curled around the edges of the planks, thick and heavy, glowing faintly with hues of sickly green and yellow. The sound of faint music played from somewhere far off, a distorted waltz, slow and haunting. Where am I?" Lucas croaked. A voice came from behind him. "You're between places." Lucas spun around. The girl was there, standing a few feet away. Her porcelain doll still clutched tightly in her hands. Her face was pale, her wide eyes reflecting the faint glow of the fog. "You jumped," she said softly. "That was brave." Lucas staggered to his feet. "What is this place? Are we out of the carnival?" The girl shook her head slowly. "No, not yet. We're in the in-between. The space between the Carnival of Shadows and whatever comes next." Lucas's stomach twisted. "What happens next?" The girl's lips trembled. "That depends on you." They walked together across the sprawling wooden platform, the boards creaking under their feet. The fog hung heavy around them, obscuring whatever lay beyond the edges. Lucas glanced over his shoulder, but the Ferris wheel was gone. The carnival was nowhere to be seen. Only the faint glow of distant lights remained. "How do we get out of here?" Lucas asked. The girl hesitated. "There's only one way out. We have to find the final gate." "The final gate? What is that?" She stopped walking and turned toward him, her eyes wide and hollow. "It's the exit, Lucas. But it's also the last choice you'll ever make. Once you pass through it, there's no turning back." Lucas frowned. "What do you mean, the last choice? Isn't it just a way out?" The girl hugged her doll tightly against her chest. "Nothing in this place is just anything, Lucas. The carnival takes what it's owed. And you owe it something." Lucas's throat felt dry. "But I didn't promise anything." The girl's gaze dropped to the wooden planks beneath her feet. "You walked through the gate, Lucas. That was enough." They walked for what felt like hours. The wooden planks stretched on endlessly, winding through the fog in strange patterns, spirals, switchbacks, and sharp angles that made no logical sense. Every now and then, Lucas would catch a faint sound, a distant laugh, the creak of a Ferris wheel, or the faint tap-tap-tap of someone walking just out of sight. But they never saw anyone. Until a door appeared in the fog. It stood upright, unsupported by walls or a building, just a single, heavy wooden door with an iron handle. Carved into its surface was a symbol, a jagged spiral with sharp edges. The girl stopped abruptly. "This is it," she said softly. Lucas stared at the door. "This is the final gate?" She nodded. Lucas hesitated. "What happens if I go through it?" The girl didn't answer right away. Her fingers toyed with the porcelain doll's cracked face. "You'll face yourself. The carnival doesn't just let people go, Lucas. It takes pieces of them, pieces they might not even realize they've given away. If you want to leave, you'll have to take those pieces back. Lucas's chest felt tight. What happens if I don't? The girl's voice dropped to a whisper. Then you stay here. Forever. Lucas stepped up to the door, his hand hovering over the iron handle. It was cold, icy, almost, and he could feel something moving behind the wood. The girl spoke one last time. Whatever you see on the other side, Lucas, don't believe it's lies. The carnival is good at pretending. It knows your fears, your regrets, your secrets. Lucas swallowed hard, and then he turned the handle. The door creaked open, and he stepped through. The world shifted around him. Gone were the wooden planks and endless fog. Instead, Lucas was standing in the middle of his childhood bedroom. The pale blue walls, the cluttered shelves filled with comic books and action figures, the faint glow of his old nightlight, shaped like a moon. It was perfect. Too perfect. Lucas. The voice came from the corner of the room. A figure stepped out of the shadows. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing an old leather jacket. His hair was messy, and his face was rough, but his eyes were the same as Lucas's. It was his father. "Dad?" Lucas whispered. His father smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, kiddo. Long time, huh?" Lucas's chest ached. You're not real. You can't be." His father's smile widened slightly, and for just a moment, Lucas saw the edges of it split unnaturally at the corners. "Why don't you stay here, Lucas? It's safe here. No carnival, no fog. Just home." The room was growing colder. The nightlight flickered faintly, and shadows began to pool in the corners of the room. Lucas's hands clenched into fists. "You're not my dad." His father took a step forward. "Lucas, son, don't do this. Don't go back out there. Just stay here, with me." The shadows crept closer, curling around Lucas's ankles like smoke. But Lucas took a step back. "No, you're not real. And this place isn't real either." The figure's face twisted, its skin stretching unnaturally as its mouth opened too wide, revealing rows of sharp, glass-like teeth. The nightlight went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Lucas turned and ran through the door behind him, his chest burning, his breath sharp. And suddenly, he was back on the wooden platform. The door slammed shut behind him, and the symbol carved into it glowed briefly before fading away. The girl was waiting for him. "You made it," she said softly. Lucas collapsed to his knees, his head in his hands. But faintly, in the distance, a new sound rose above the fog. A faint, distant bell tolling, low and heavy. The girl's voice trembled. "It's time, Lucas. The carnival's waking up." The sound of the bell tolling echoed through the fog, low and deep, like the final heartbeat of a dying giant. Each chime reverberated in Lucas's chest, vibrating through his bones and carrying with it a heavy sense of finality. The girl gripped her porcelain doll tighter, her pale knuckles trembling against the cracked ceramic. "It's awake," she whispered. Lucas pushed himself to his feet, his breath sharp and uneven. "What do you mean it's awake?" The girl's wide eyes reflected the faint golden glow from the fog. "The carnival. It's alive, Lucas, and it knows we're here." The wooden platform beneath their feet began to tremble, faint vibrations shaking the planks and sending tiny cracks, spiderwebbing across the surface. In the distance, faint golden lights flickered, thousands of them, glowing like sickly stars scattered across the endless fog. "It's pulling us back," the girl said, her voice sharp with panic. "We have to keep moving. The final gate was just the first trial." Lucas clenched his fists. "You said the Ferris wheel was the way out. You said we'd be free." The girl's lips trembled, her voice breaking. "I thought it would be. But the carnival isn't just a place, Lucas. It's hungry. It doesn't let go so easily." Lucas's stomach churned. "Then what now?" The girl pointed into the swirling fog, where faint shapes loomed in the distance, arches twisted and metallic, rising out of the mist like ribs in a skeletal chest. "The Midway," she said softly. "It's the heart of the carnival. If we can make it there, we might have one last chance." Lucas glanced over his shoulder. The faint outline of the final gate was already fading, swallowed by the growing fog. The distant laughter of the carnival folk was starting again, high-pitched and hollow, like rusty hinges creaking open. "Then let's go," Lucas said firmly. They ran. The Midway was unlike anything Lucas had seen before. The towering arches stretched high into the sky, twisted and misshapen, their metallic surfaces corroded and dripping with something dark and oily. Rows of faded tents and crooked game stalls lined the path, their colorful stripes now dulled and peeling. The air smelled of burnt sugar and rust, and faint whispers slipped through the mist like spider silk. Above them, golden lights flickered on thin wires, humming faintly with energy. Lucas could feel something, watching them. Every tent, every booth, every shadow. "They're here," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas turned and froze. Standing in the archway behind them were the carnival folk. Dozens of them, figures in cracked porcelain masks, faded velvet costumes, and hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. At the front stood the man in the top hat. His waxen face was stretched into an impossibly wide grin, and his hollow eyes locked onto Lucas. "Lucas," the man said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "The carnival doesn't like quitters." The carnival folks stepped forward in unison, their movements sharp and synchronized, like marionettes on invisible strings. "Run!" the girls screamed. They sprinted down the Midway, their feet slamming against the wooden planks as they weaved between crooked stalls and faded rides. Behind them, the carnival folk pursued, gliding, twitching, their hollow eyes fixed on Lucas and the girl. The calliope music began again, louder this time, chaotic and shrill. Lucas's chest burned as he pushed himself faster. The Midway seemed endless, stretching on and on without a clear end in sight. And then they saw it. At the far end of the Midway, partially hidden by swirling fog, was a grand tent. Black and gold stripes, towering spires, and flickering lanterns casting faint shadows against the fabric walls. The girl pointed. "That's it! The big top!" But just as they neared the tent's entrance, the wooden planks beneath Lucas's feet splintered. He stumbled, crashing onto the platform as a gnarled hand shot up through the cracks, its sharp fingers clawing at his ankle. "Lucas!" the girl screamed. He kicked frantically, wrenching his foot free from the skeletal grip before scrambling back to his feet. They lunged through the tent's entrance and into darkness. Inside the big top there was no light, no flickering lanterns, no golden glow, just pure, suffocating darkness. Lucas could hear the girl's ragged breathing beside him. Somewhere in the distance, faint footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, like someone walking across an empty stage. A voice, sharp, cold, and echoing, filled the air. "Welcome to the grand finale." A spotlight snapped on, blinding Lucas with its pale glow. When his eyes adjusted, he saw it. At the center of the tent stood a massive mirror, its surface cracked and smeared with dark streaks. The girl stepped back, her voice trembling. "No, not the mirror. Please, not the mirror." Lucas stared at her. "What is it? What's in there?" The girl's voice broke. "It's us. It's the carnival's reflection. If we go in, we might not come back out." The mirror's surface began to ripple, faint outlines of shapes moving behind the glass. Lucas took a step forward. "Is this the way out?" The voice returned, louder this time, echoing through the tent. "One last choice, Lucas. Step through, or stay forever." The girl's voice cracked. "Lucas, don't do it." Lucas clenched his fists. But what if it's the only way out? The mirror's surface shivered, and faint images flickered across it. His childhood bedroom, the Ferris wheel, the gas station. And then He saw himself, standing on the other side of the glass, staring back at him with wide eyes. His reflection raised its hand, palm pressed against the glass. "Come on, Lucas," the reflection said softly. "You're almost free." The girl grabbed his arm. "Lucas, it's lying." The reflection's smile widened. "Who are you going to trust?" "Lucas. Her or yourself?" The fog pressed against the tent walls, the faint sound of carnival laughter rising in pitch. Lucas took a deep breath. One choice. One final choice. He stepped toward the mirror, his reflection reaching out to meet him. The girl screamed his name. "Lucas!" And then he stepped through. The surface of the mirror rippled like liquid glass as Lucas stepped through. For a moment there was nothing, no sound, no light, no sensation. Just an endless, suffocating void. And then his feet hit solid ground. Lucas staggered forward, gasping for breath as cold air filled his lungs. His sneakers crunched against wet gravel, and the faint scent of rusted metal and burnt sugar filled his nostrils. Slowly he looked up. He was standing in the middle of a carnival midway, but it wasn't the same twisted place he'd left behind. The lights here were brighter, sharper. The tents were vibrant, with red and white stripes that seemed freshly painted. The Ferris wheel towered above him in the distance, its gondolas gently swaying in the night breeze. Calliope music played faintly, clear and unwarped, echoing softly across the grounds. It felt normal, but something still felt off. The air was too still, the shadows too deep. And then he noticed the people. Figures walked among the carnival stalls, men, women, and children, all dressed in faded clothing from different eras. Their faces were expressionless, their eyes hollow, and their movements mechanical, like poorly operated puppets. Lucas's chest tightened. "Where am I?" he whispered. From somewhere nearby, a slow clap echoed through the fog. "Bravo, Lucas. Truly, bravo." Lucas spun around. Standing in front of a crooked carousel was the man in the top hat. His waxen face gleamed faintly under the flickering carnival lights, and his hollow eyes glinted like shards of glass. His wide, unnatural grin stretched across his pale face. "You made it through the mirror," the man said, tipping his hat slightly. "Not many do." Lucas's voice trembled. "Where am I? Is this the way out?" The man chuckled softly, a sound like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "Oh no, dear boy. You're not out. You've simply crossed to the other side of the carnival." Lucas's stomach sank. No, you're lying. This was supposed to be the way out." The man's grin faltered, just slightly, before returning to its unnatural wideness. "The carnival doesn't have an exit, Lucas. Not really. It's a loop, a cycle. Every mirror, every gate, every Ferris wheel, they're all doors leading to the same place. Here." Lucas's breath hitched in his throat. No, there has to be a way out. There has to be." The man took a step forward, his polished boots clicking softly against the gravel. "Oh, there's one way out, Lucas, but it comes at a price." Lucas's voice shook. "What price?" The man gestured to the carnival around them, the hollow-eyed people, the flickering lights, the distant, distorted music. "Someone has to take your place." Lucas froze. What do you mean?" The man spread his arms wide, his grin splitting his face like a cracked mask. "The carnival always needs a caretaker, Lucas. Someone to keep the lights on, someone to keep the music playing, someone to watch the gates." Lucas stumbled backward, his pulse roaring in his ears. No, that's not fair." The man's hollow eyes bore into him. "Fair? Oh, Lucas, nothing about this place has ever been fair." A faint voice cut through the fog. "Lucas?" He turned sharply. The girl stood at the edge of the midway, clutching her porcelain doll tightly. Her wide eyes glistened with fear, her voice trembling. "You don't have to do this, Lucas," she cried. There's another way. The man in the top hat's smile faltered. Quiet, child, he hissed. Lucas's chest ached. His mind was racing. What other way? He shouted back to the girl. The girl stepped forward, her voice urgent. The carnival isn't real, Lucas. It's built on promises and fear. If you refuse to play by its rules, if you reject it, it can't hold you. The man in the top hat's waxen face cracked slightly, his grin faltering. Don't listen to her, Lucas, he snapped, his voice rising in anger. She's trying to trick you. But Lucas could feel it now, a thread of truth in the girl's words. The carnival fed on fear, on promises made in weakness, on souls bound by regret. But what if he didn't play the game anymore? What if he simply stopped believing in it? Lucas stepped backward, his voice steady despite the panic roaring in his chest. No. The man in the top hat froze. Lucas took another step back. I'm not staying. I'm not giving you anything. This place, it's not real. It's a trap. And I'm done playing along. The man's hollow eyes widened, cracks spiderwebbing across his waxen face. You can't just leave, Lucas. The carnival doesn't let go. But the fog was starting to thin. The lights flickered violently, sparks erupting from dangling bulbs. The hollow-eyed carnival-goers froze in place, their heads snapping toward Lucas in unison. The girl reached out her hand. Lucas, run! The man in the top hat let out an inhuman screech, his voice splitting like shattered glass. The ground beneath Lucas's feet trembled, the wooden planks cracking and splintering as he sprinted toward the girl. The fog was pulling back now, unraveling like smoke caught in the wind. The girl's hand met his, and for just a moment everything felt real. Close your eyes, she cried. Lucas squeezed his eyes shut. The sound of splintering wood, screeching metal, and distant hollow laughter rose to an ear-splitting crescendo. And then, silence. Lucas opened his eyes. He was standing in an empty field. The sun was rising in the distance, casting a golden glow across the wet grass. Morning dew sparkled on the leaves, and a faint breeze brushed against his face. The carnival was gone. No tents, no lights, no fog. Just silence. Beside him, the girl was gone too, but her porcelain doll lay on the ground, cracked and broken. Lucas knelt down, picking up the fragile doll and holding it gently in his trembling hands. He looked out across the empty horizon, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. He was free. But somewhere, faint and distant, like an echo carried on the wind, he could still hear it. The faint sound of calliope music drifting on the breeze. And one final whisper. Come back soon, Lucas. The carnival is always waiting.